We will come back to that point in due course. But thank you for all that. That's extraordinarily exciting story about the Romanian community. That's quite amazing to turn that on its head, that it's the radio program that helped create that community in a sense, rather than growing out of the community. Now that Auckland is the 6th most immigrant-intensive city in the world, over 1 million people, your job has hardly begun. If you've only just at your high point got to just over 50 languages, there's a good few more to come. Before I just turn to David, I would say that we're very keen to make this as interactive as possible. So if you've got some sort of highs and lows about public service broadcasting you'd like to chip in once we've finished this round, I'm very keen to hear from you on those. So, David. David has a broadcasting career that spans more decades even than my career in journalism, and covers television news and current affairs, classics like Compass, Gallery, Eyewitness News and Foreign Correspondent. He's been editor of the News at 6, but presumably before Peter saw it, I think. Judging just sort of
when it was
roughly comparing chronologies here. That's right. And News at 10 on and such programmes, and also a 6-year stint as chairman of New Zealand On Air. He has digressed into such roles as press secretary to Prime Minister Jim Bolger, and as chief executive of the New Zealand Tourism Board. But he's come back to his roots as a blogger on the Pundit website and host of a weekly interview programme, The Beatson Interview, on Triangle and Stratos Television. So, David, highs and lows.
After 45 years, the high will always be the program we do tomorrow, and the low will always be the program we did yesterday. I had the great joy to work with a team in television in a period in which we were encouraged, positively encouraged, to challenge the decision makers of our society on behalf of the public. It was a great time. I learnt a hell of a lot, and I'm very grateful to have had that experience. The low is to see that this year, as we approach the most significant technological change since the introduction of television and indeed broadcasting as a whole in New Zealand, we have no examination of the role of public broadcasting services happening. We have no recognition that the nature of communications has changed dramatically and will continue to change dramatically, and that we've got to get out of our silos in radio and television and start thinking of ourselves as multimedia communicators. We have to live with the times, and the times are changing very rapidly, and we must learn to adapt and change to the needs of the public. And it really hurts me to see that the response to this challenge is to put public broadcasting in deep freeze. Everything is frozen. New Zealand On Air, funding frozen. Radio New Zealand, funding frozen. We have a situation where 2 experiments in the provision of television public broadcasting have both ended in dismal, calamitous, $million failures. No one has examined or asked why these scandals, and they are scandals, have happened. It should have been post-mortem. You spend $79 million worth of taxpayers' funding to evaporate 2 minor experiments in advertising-free television on the Freeview platform, and I think you've actually got to be called to account for what you did. You were entrusted with a public duty. You were entrusted with a public duty. You made commitments that said, this will be a self-funding institution. Well, I'm damned if I know how it would ever be a self-funding institution. It carried no advertising. No effort seems to have been made to attract sponsorship of any kind or consider where that funding might be raised from other quarters than from New Zealand On Air or from the direct vote that was provided by the government. The government has to be guilty of bad stewardship, and I am astounded that such a thing can happen. And I really can't understand why there aren't a hell of a lot of young people actually wanting to do what we did, which was to call these decision makers to account. You've got to keep on hammering. And why am I still piddling around? Because I believe in that task. I believe in that mission. And I believe that we've got to fight for it and we've got to retain it. And I'm hopeful that we can. Thank you.
Stirring words. That's tremendous. I can see what keeps you going. And
Adrenaline.
And just that the two experiments you're
I was talking
referring
about the
to.
charter, which was another multi-million-dollar evaporation. What lasting result and change did it produce? To have simply just decided it was a bad thing without really examining what change actually did occur, and there were changes as a result of the charter. I mean, it was difficult, sure, and I believe it probably was a suicide mission, but our decision makers would have actually learnt something. They'd have learnt something about what it takes to sustain a vital public broadcasting service if they'd taken the time to do a proper post-mortem.
Yes, thank you. Now I'm just going to turn to Scott. Scott, what are we getting from our online audience?
Actually, quite a lot. I wanted to point out a couple of tweets that I think are worth focusing on. Tom Butlin's made a couple of points. The top one there, community building via public radio. Nice aim, but social media clubs meetings achieve the same for $0. It's worth commenting, I think. Earlier he mentioned that perhaps we should be focusing on examples of countries or broadcasters with optimal public broadcasting policies that we could discuss. Yeah. But similarly, there's been a couple of emails that I wanted to mention as well. The first from Hugh Wilson refers specifically to the demise of Channel 7 and wonders whether the tertiary institutions themselves could cooperate to partially fill the gap, as indeed is happening with the Southern Institute channel. And finally, someone calling themselves a taxpayer directs to Peter whether he would be willing to pay twice as much tax to support public broadcasting.
Very good. Well, I think I should ask for an answer.
We get twice as much tax. Gee, we could have the BBC and some if we all paid twice as much tax. Let's put this in context. If we wanted to maintain TVNZ 7 under the model that TVNZ proposed to the government, it'd be about $16 million a year. Now there are arguments that you could do that for a lot less money. Fair enough, but 16 million isn't a huge amount. That would work out something like 1 cent per person per day. About a cup of coffee a year if you push it. So I don't think that's a big deal. So would I be prepared to pay 1 cent extra a day? Yes. Let's go to the other extreme. I calculated that if you took the overall operating expenses and amortization costs of Sky for its entire operation, and you divided that cost across 1.6 odd million New Zealand households, you could provide the entirety of Sky's services, every channel, the rugby, the movies, the arts channels, the whole gamut, even the Chinese and the Hindi channels. You could do that for $1 a day per household in New Zealand. So don't tell me that we can't afford public broadcasting, public television in New Zealand. Quite clearly we could if we wanted to. So the argument is, how much do we want to provide? There's a neoliberal argument that says that any requirement to pay taxes for television that we don't watch is somehow an imposition on consumer sovereignty. Well, okay, let's have a look at the $800 and $900 million that we pay as a public community at the cash tills in the supermarkets that goes towards the provision of commercial television. Free to air? Well, it's free to air when you switch on the TV. It ain't free to air when you go and look at the supermarket prices, because the costs of advertising are passed on to the consumer. Now, if you watch all the programs that are subsidised through advertising, well, I guess you're getting value for money. But if there are programs that you don't watch, you're not. So the neoliberal response has to look at that before they go and criticise public broadcasting, because we're not talking about $800 and $900 million. In the case of TVN7, we're talking about something like $16 million a year. If you wanted to provide a channel like TV1 or TV2, fully funded, without any commercials, you might be talking about $130 million a year. 50% advertising, with a bit of help from New Zealand Air, maybe $50 million. So this is easily affordable. In the same week that the current government decided that it wasn't going to continue the funding for TVNZ7, it was also quite happily contemplating an $800 to $1 billion bailout for AMI insurance. So on the one hand, there's plenty of money if you happen to be a corporation. If you happen to be a public broadcaster doing public good, all of a sudden there's nothing left in the budget. Well, I'm sorry, I don't buy it.
Right. I'm going to come back to the finances in a mo, but I just wanted to pick up from Terry what your response to this tweet is here about community building via public radio. Nice aim, but social media clubs meetings achieve the same. So how do you feel about that? How would you say that you're doing something that those can't?
Well, in so many ways. For a start, the Romanian example is a good one, but there are many, many others, the Pacific community, all sorts. They gather around their radios rather than commute to a hall or whatever to have these meetings, or they do it as well. But we're online as a radio station. Everything we broadcast is available for 7 days after broadcast on planetaudio.org.nz, and we offer the opportunity to people who are interested in getting ideas out there. If we don't have enough space for them or the right time for them, hey, would you like to make something and put it up online? We just provide the recording services and it goes direct onto the web. And they look at me with puzzlement on their face and they say, but would we be on the radio? Because for them, the radio is an intimate space. It's one they share with families. Our research shows for every listener there is, to our station, that there are many others gathered around, that it's a family activity, that it's a communal activity. We're empowering them as communicators because we're training them to become broadcasters. That makes them able to communicate larger and wider about many, many other issues. They can get in guests and they cover education issues, health issues, all sorts of things that are vital for them as communities. To say that can be conducted in a hall on a cold, rainy winter's night, it's kind of like, yeah, if we were still in the village, but this is the village. The radio station is the well.
Thank you. Now, before we move on to a really important fork in the road in the discussion here about whether it's just a question of pushing harder on this government or hoping to hope to change its mind or wait for the next government to come along to try to keep existing models going, whether we just sort of forget that and move on to a brave new future without government. We'll get to that point in a moment, but I'm just very keen to hear from any of you, and we've got microphones to hand, if you would like to offer your own little bits of the mosaic of public broadcasting about great bits, highs and lows, great moments in public broadcasting. Yes, let me see if I can get you a microphone. Ladies right behind you. We can hear you very well in here. This is just to make sure that the online audience hears you. Thanks.
I just wanted to say that I consider Maori television to be fulfilling a component of public broadcasting, and that I think that it's actually helping to create a community in New Zealand as well.
Thank you. So you'd approving sounds from David here. So you'd see that as...
Not only that, but I think if you actually examine what Maori television has achieved with 88% local content, with over 70% of the programming in te reo, with a situation in which you've got diversity, you've got quality in their programming, and they're producing it for around $36,000 an hour compared to $86,000 an hour for our commercial networks. I think you've got the beginnings of a glimmering of how a public broadcasting system could operate.